Hello Internet, time for another year-end vlog. Since the previous video was kind of serious, I wanted to talk about something a little bit more lighthearted, and usually when I discuss topics like these, I usually get a lot of views on my channel, so it's a win-win. Now, 2019 has been an interesting year in regards to the Power Rangers franchise. I mean, most notably, we saw the franchise go from being controlled by Bandai, one of the major sponsors of the series that Power Rangers is based on, Super Sentai, to the American toy company Hasbro. And that's had both positives and negatives. The positive is that it's led to a lot more money being put into the show itself, resulting in what I've heard to be a really good season that is Beast Morphers. However, there's a lot of speculation as to what that handover means, given that it's now being managed by Hasbro here in the States, whereas their rival company Bandai still has the rights to the Super Sentai series in Japan. That raises questions of whether or not Saban still has the rights to the Super Sentai series, or if they're having to go back and adapt older seasons prior to Shurikenger, which became Ninja Steel. In the midst of all of this, something that I've been seeing as speculation, or even as something that fans would want, it raises the question, could it be possible to actually make a Shattered Grid movie? For those of you not in the know, Shattered Grid was an event that took place in the two Power Rangers comics that I mentioned earlier, the Mighty Morphin series and Go-Go Power Rangers, which basically both focus on the Mighty Morphin team at different points in the series, with Go-Go Power Rangers focusing on the Rangers in the wake of Day of the Dumpster, the first episode, and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers picking up after the conclusion of the Green with Evil arc. The general premise of Shattered Grid is that you have an alternate universe version of Tommy Oliver who chose to stay evil and take on the name Lord Drakon. After killing Rita Repulsa, he decides to basically try to conquer and take control of the Morphing Grid in order to rule the world. As you do. As a result, it causes reality to basically go haywire, bringing a lot of Rangers from a lot of different Ranger teams from across the franchise together to basically team up and try to stop Lord Drakon. And so, with a lot of the hype that surrounded Shattered Grid, a lot of people then began wondering, okay, what if they decided, now that they have the money from Hasbro, to do a Shattered Grid movie or a Shattered Grid miniseries? Well, let's actually break this down and see what obstacles Hasbro and Saban would have, and to see if it actually would be possible. So, the first obstacle regarding to whether or not they actually could do a Shattered Grid series or a Shattered Grid movie. Firstly, and it's probably the biggest issue, bringing back past actors to reprise their roles. Power Rangers is a non-union show, which means that they don't work with any of the guilds here in America. They don't work with the Screen Actors Guild, the Writers Guild, or the Producers Guild, and this is also why the series is shot primarily in New Zealand. A lot of actors who were in Power Rangers have either left the entertainment industry or they've joined one of the guilds, predominantly the Screen Actors Guild. When I was at the very first Salt Lake Comic-Con, we had David Yost, Walter Jones, and Serena Vincent, who were the Blue, Black, and Yellow Lost Galaxy Rangers respectively. And David Yost has since become a producer and no longer acts, whereas Jones and Vincent are both members of the Screen Actors Guild. They first explained that they don't get reimbursed for travel, meaning they have to pay for their own ticket to New Zealand and back, and then they would have to leave the Screen Actors Guild in order to go do the shoot, because again, it's non-union, and then upon coming back to the United States, they would then have to pay to rejoin the Screen Actors Guild. Apparently, it is a common practice that certain actors do, where if they're having to take on non-union projects, they leave the guild and then pay to come back in. And, well, that's a very pricey thing to do. Like, this is in the $1,000 range, to give you kind of an idea of how much money we are talking. But on top of that, there were also actors from the Power Rangers franchise where they didn't necessarily leave the series on good terms. And then there's also other actors that the fanbase most certainly would not want to come back. If you know, you know. So therein lies the first issue, trying to bring back as many of the older actors as you could. Some are probably willing to come back since they're established voice actors, and some of them are even still working on the show to this day. But because of the sheer amount of people you would need to bring back, you're naturally gonna run into the issue where not everybody is going to want to come back, and if you don't get the specific people you want to come back, well, then you're gonna have to rework the storyline, which would naturally set some fans off. This brings me to the second issue and obstacle that would come from trying to do a Shattered Grid movie or series. Given that Mighty Morphin, the comic, at least the current comic from Boom Studios, clearly takes place in modern day, having the older actors reprise their roles, given that it's been more than almost 30 years now, it's not really going to work since the story very much hinges on the original Rangers being teenagers. As nice as it would be to bring back people like Austin St. John, Well, I've heard his voiceover in Battle for the Grid. You can get away with that in voiceover, but if you're going to do it as a live action series, no amount of CGI is going to really make it believable. I mean, it didn't work for, well, Peter Cushing, case in point. But then that raises another question. Okay, well, why don't you bring just new actors to play the younger versions? Well, that raises its own fair share of questions. Do you try to do the whole, well, Rogue One and basically create CGI hybrids of live actors that are made to look slightly like younger versions of established characters and established actors? Or do you just try to write it off as, oh, well, they look kind of sort of different, do a little bit of makeup, but then establish them as our own? Or do you go kind of the multiverse theory and that, okay, this is just a different version of the characters, that they are the same characters, they just don't look like them because they're from a different dimension. Because of the kerfuffle going on now that they're rebooting the Power Rangers movies again and basically throwing away all the stuff from the movie cast, you can guarantee that they probably wouldn't approach using the movie cast anytime soon. Now, I know what some of you might also think, oh, why not just make Lord Drakon the new villain of the upcoming reboot movie? Well, this leads to another problem, which dovetails into the problem of having different actors playing the established characters. You see, the reason that a lot of Power Rangers fans like Lord Drakon is because it very much hinges on the nostalgia that the fan base has for Tommy Oliver, and specifically Jason David Frank. And so, if you have Jason David Frank playing Drakon in a movie, most people who aren't familiar with Power Rangers aren't going to understand the significance or why Drakon is such a big deal. It's just not really going to work. And then if you add that to the fact of, oh, if you have a different actor playing Tommy, but then you also have the original actor playing Tommy, playing a character who's supposed to be a future version of Tommy, whereas in the comics they make it clear that Drakon and Tommy are relatively the same age during the course of the story, you run into that same issue again of, oh, okay, I'm supposed to believe that this is a future version of this character. And again, while the fan base might be forgiving of that, regular audiences, not so much. Now for the third major obstacle, Toei and Bandai. While Saban still has control of the Power Rangers seasons that they adapted into Power Rangers and still has, in certain respects, the rights to use the footage and the likenesses, we still don't know to what extent the rights Saban has regarding the Sentai series. And that's not even getting into the idea of, oh, if they create toys and stuff like that and the distribution thereof, yeah, basically trying to distribute it anywhere outside of territories where Hasbro has control would be a nightmare in and of itself, probably resulting in the film not getting distributed at all. Now, I've discussed the issues with a live-action adaptation, so some of you may wonder, okay, what if they did it as an animated movie or an animated series? Now, there was talks of doing Power Rangers as an animated series, and naturally a lot of people were kind of upset with that prospect. But if you look at series like Gridman or the Ultraman series on Netflix, for example, well, tokusatsu properties have been having a bit of an easier time being adapted to animation, particularly if you're going with 3D animation as opposed to 2D animation. I mean, the best possible scenario is you do the 2D, 3D hybrid that you see with Gridman, where you have the human characters done in 2D animated style, but then the monster fight scenes are done using cel-shaded 3D animation to kind of simulate that artificiality that we get from the rubber suits. As for where I stand in the idea of a Shattered Grid miniseries or a Shattered Grid movie, first off, nothing's ever really been announced or confirmed. This was just fans speculating, and one fan just speculating on whether or not it would be feasible. Personally, I'll just stick with the comics. I mean, I've heard good things about Battle for the Grid. I've heard that the fighting mechanics are decent. But if I wanted to see the storyline of Shattered Grid, well, I have the entire run in the comics. I could just go back and reread it to my heart's delight. And honestly, I don't see much point in revisiting the story again. What do you guys think? Do you think that it is within the realm of possibility? Do you think that they'd be able to pull it off? Or do you have kind of the same concerns that I do because of the current state of the franchise right now? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.